Welcome to North Point. Great to have you with us today on a holiday weekend. And man, I hope that you had a good ending to November. A lot of you probably with family, friends, Thanksgiving. Hopefully you got still some King's Hawaiian rolls left with stuff to put in. This is happy, stuff everything into some bread week, and hope you're taking advantage of that. Today we are going to continue in our series and actually wrap up our series, Too Stressed to Be Blessed. The whole idea is there's a lot of things that are competing for our attention, our presence, our focus, and we're going to dive into that today. But I want to welcome each of our campuses. Right now we have 4 campuses and those who are joining online. So today hope you're doing well. Glad you're here, whichever campus you're at, wherever you're joining us. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the number one stress. Survey says the number one stress for Americans is, did you say mother-in-law? Did someone just say mother-in-law? It's money. And it's not just money, it's your money, okay? So the number one, so here's the deal. It's awkward. We don't want to talk about money, but it's the number one stress. We cannot do a series called Too Stressed to Be Blessed without talking about money. And so I know it's going to be awkward, so let's just break the ice. Why don't you turn to someone near you, tell them how much you make, and then we'll just be done with it, okay? Just do that. Now, we're going to talk about this because I think it is going to be something that we all wrestle with. Now, as we talk about money today, I want us to understand that we didn't come to our own perspective of money on accident or on our own. Most of us had some help to get there. So how many of you, show of hands, how many of you had parents teach you a lot about money, good or bad, good or bad, good or bad? You learned a lot about your money situation from your parents, okay? How many of you played this game growing up? Anybody? Anybody play the game of life growing up? Okay, the game of life is one of the oldest games printed in America. This game was printed in 1860. If you're doing the math, that's 75 years before Monopoly had a monopoly on board games, okay? So 1860, and this game, according to very scientific research, okay? This game was developed like most American games early on as kind of a catechism, a teaching tool to teach people about the morals of life. And so if you wanted your kids to grow up and have good principles, good ethics, you would buy this game and they would learn everything they need to know about life. Now, if you've not played the game, that's on you. It's been around way long, okay? But today, let me tell you a little bit about it. You start by getting a little car, okay? Can everybody see this? Okay, well, in case you can't, okay, I'm going to drive. Okay, so you get a car, just like this. And so what happens, you start and you're kind of a young adult, okay? You're growing up and you start there and then you're going to end in retirement. And, you know, I don't know if the early ones ended in a cemetery. We don't know how that worked. But so throughout the way you're cruising through life and you're a little vehicle and you're going to collect different cards along the way. Depends on where you land. And you got this spinner and all sorts of fun things. And what you do is you might get like a bonus, a promotion. You might get a tax bill. And if you're not careful, you're going to land on a spot and you're going to end up getting a little peg for your car. And if you get a little peg for your car, it means you get a little baby named Peg in your car. And then remember, the whole purpose of the game of life is to teach you morals for life. And when you get a little baby, and all you parents know that this is true, what it really means is going to cost you a lot of money, okay? And so what you're trying to do is avoid them like the plague. Again, morals of life. And if you end up rolling the dice or spinning the spinner and getting triplets, oh, Nelly, you've got a full car and an empty wallet, okay? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to make it all the way through life. And you got to make choices. Am I like going to go to college? Am I going to go right to the workforce? And all these kind of things. Now, it's a very popular game, and I want us to look at how you win the game. This is according to the official rules of the game of life. How you win, it says, when you get to the end, you add up your final wealth. You sell your houses, okay? Then you collect $100,000 for all the action cards you've collected. And then you collect cash for your kids. I don't think that's legal in most countries, okay? But there are days where it's tempting, okay? But you collect cash for your kids, and then you repay your loans, and here's how it ends. Number 5, count your cash. If you have the most, congratulations, you win. And that, my friends, is the game of life, the game designed as a catechism to teach your youngsters what's really important in life. Now, we Americans, we're way too smart to be suckered into the theology of Milton Bradley, are we not? So here's what I want us to do. I want us to talk about the game of life. We're going to just kind of back this train up and just get it out of the way. That'll work. You can play the keys. Okay. So today I want to talk about this idea of the game of life compared to these principles that Jesus talks about. Because I believe the teachings from Jesus are absolutely juxtaposed to the teachings of Milton Bradley, right? This idea is life more than just what we collect. This assumption of consumption, this desire to acquire, this idea that we need to win. Because here's the challenge. If we believe what the game of life's trying to teach us, we believe that if we have more money than those around us, we're winning. Now, I don't know how awkward this is, but if you swivel around and you're like the average American, you tend to compare yourself. When you scroll, if you're like the average American, you tend to compare yourself. And sometimes we feel like if we have more than them, we're winning. And that's not what Jesus teaches. And sometimes when we compare and we feel like we have less than them, we're losing. And that's not what Jesus teaches. And today I want to talk to us about Jesus and his take on finances and what it means to us to be able to live the kind of life that we realize he's our provider and that we have a role to manage everything he's given in a way that makes an impact in the world we live. And I don't know where you find yourself on this thing. So whether you feel like you're winning, where you feel like you're losing, I think the teaching from Jesus is going to challenge all of us. I don't want anybody today to walk out of here with guilt, okay? That's not what this is about. We live in a country that has learned lessons that aren't right. And we are the products of those lessons. So today, if you feel any guilt, I want you, this is the only recommendation I have from any of Taylor Swift's songs, okay? I want you to shake it off, okay? That's all I want you to do. So if you feel that and you leave with guilt, that's not on me. Don't blame the preacher, okay? Because I want you to know there are seasons where almost all of us have gone or are going through where we are absolutely strapped and trapped financially, okay? It's part of life. But at the same time, if you're there, I don't want you to feel like guilty because you're there, like you're losing because you're there. I want you to feel like God's right there with you. And I want you to have some principles that you can wrestle to freedom because of that. And if you're in a spot where you've got more than most, I hope today you realize the gift that is from God and what you can do with that. And so we're going to walk through that. Now, let me give some stats that are kind of interesting about money. Number one stress most Americans have is financial pressure. The number 2 leading cause of divorce, verbalized, is financial stress. Right? Financial stress. The number 1 leading cause of divorce, unfaithfulness, sometimes might be impacted by the number 2 leading cause of divorce too. So I think it's a blurry line. Finances mess up families. Finances mess up commitments. Finances mess up peace of mind. It would be spiritual malpractice for me not to do a series on stress and address the thing that's the most stressful thing. Now, when we look at different things, different stats, they have these different things that will compute the average percentage of savings for a country. And we see the Federal Reserve Bank, they did a survey this year, and they computed what the average American saves per year. Okay? So on the count of three, I want you to yell out what number, 1 to 100, what percent the average American saves. Okay? On the count of three, you ready? You got a number in mind? The average American, they save this percentage. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's go one at a time. It's 3%. Okay, anybody right? Anybody right? Okay. Now, when you hear 3%, some of you are like, what? How are they going to live if they're only saving 3%? Some of you are like, what? How do people have 3% extra? Okay, I want us to understand that 3% that's the average American savings. There's a lot of people who save a lot more than 3%, and there's a lot of people who don't save 3%. Now, how does that compare? Are we like, okay, as a country, we're like, we're doing pretty good. I want you on the count of three. Now, this is a really interactive message, okay? So I'm going to need you to talk. I hope you have some throat coat or something so your throat doesn't get sore today. On the count of three, I want you to yell out which country, Investopedia did a survey, which country saves the highest percentage of their income? Which country? Okay, think of the richest countries out there. Which one saves the most? On the count of three, yell it out. 1, 2, 3. How many said Australia? Anybody say Australia? Hands up proudly. You're wrong. Okay. Anybody say Djibouti? Anybody shake Djibouti? Okay. If you said Djibouti, you're correct. And some of you are like, well, yeah, that just makes sense because they're the wealthiest country out there. Then y'all ain't been to Djibouti, okay? Djibouti is not one of the wealthiest countries out there. The average income for an individual in Djibouti is about $6,000 a year, and the average person in Djibouti, they save 85% of their income. Americans make a lot more than $6,000 per year, and we save 3% of our income. Now, you're like, okay, if you look at that from Investopedia, you're going to see a lot of the European countries average about 20%. Luxembourg, Sweden, a lot of them are 20% they save. But I think those stats are skewed because European ladies, they don't have to buy razors. And so we got a lot more expenses than some, that kind of thing. I get that. But I want us to look at, when you look at those stats, Americans don't save as much. Well, then you look at, why don't we save as much? Maybe because we don't make as much. And so then you look at the GDP list, right? And Bankrate's got these different lists that they have. And in 2024 GDP list, from them, they say America comes in. And I don't know, have you ever seen the Olympics opening ceremony? And this isn't political, okay? I'm not talking about that, okay? But have you ever seen how long an Olympics opening ceremony is? It's forever, okay? And then it's alphabetical, and we live in a U country, right? So we're like, it's gonna wake me up tomorrow morning, right? So think of all those countries that parade. If it was a parade, America, and they went in order of how much money the average person makes, America would be anywhere between 5th and 8th. Bankrate says they're number 7 right now for amount of money that comes in. So the 7th ranking income producing country saves 3% a year. What's going on? Well, they say some other things about NerdWallet says this, that the average American has 3 credit cards with debt on it, consumer debt, and the average credit card debt per card is $6,000, give or take. So the average American owes $18,000, not on a house, not on a school loan, on what you ate last month, okay? So the average American. Now some of you are like, I'm way above average. Okay, this is not where you want to brag. Storage units in America, 1960s, they weren't a thing. How many wish you had a time machine? You can go back and start a storage unit company. As right now, there are over 50 million units not available, but are rented right now in America. What happened from 1860 to 1960 to 2024, America has gotten wealthy. And you know what we have? A whole lot of stuff. I like to sit in my overstuffed chair after I'm super stuffed from Thanksgiving, nibbling on a double stuffed Oreo, right? We've got stuff. We got so much stuff, we're like stressing out about where am I gonna put my stuff? Like, I've got to find a safe and secure place. And so now we have 50 million storage units available. Great boom in business because Americans have a desire to acquire. The average house square footage in 1960s was 1,100 square feet. The average house in 2023 was 2,299 square feet. Now, this is not a message about how many square feet should your house be. I don't care, okay? What I want us to understand is what's happened is our grandparents had a definition of need that we define differently. And our grandkids are going to define it differently than we do. Is this game really teaching us the kind of ethics and morals that we want? That he who has the most stuff before you go back in the box wins? What does Jesus have to say about this? Now, let me give you the big idea. The big idea, well, one, it's not in your outline, but it's just kind of in my heart is this, that God blesses resources that don't try to take his place. The goal of this is not to have the most, and the goal of this is not to get rid of the most. The goal of this is to be very present and to be part of the solution that God desires you to be part of. So that whatever season you're in, whether you have plenty or whether you have little, as Paul says, you can learn to be content. What would it look like if you lived in the country, and I love our country, right? I'm not bashing that, I can't believe we're 7th place, man. God, can you make us a lot lower on the list? No, I'm like, what an opportunity we have, but what a misfire. What a waste of an opportunity when the 7th highest producing country is one of the lowest saving countries, the least amount of margin. And isn't it crazy on the global stage that people would see what we make and they would say, what do you think Americans' number one source of stress is? And resoundingly, it's finances. And usually it's not too much of it. It's usually lack of. What if we're doing it wrong? So today I want to talk about that. And I want to look at the top 2 things on your outline. They look the same, but they're completely different. The first is this. Most people make giving decisions, generosity, based on living habits. Most people will decide what they're going to do about giving and generosity based on what's left over from how they live. If you're in that boat, it's a crowded boat. No shame on this. Shake it off. Here's what statistics would say. Most Americans are in this spot. The average American, 49% of Americans cannot afford one emergency that comes up. And they define emergency as a $1,000 unexpected expense. And if you've ever had a real emergency, you know they cost a lot more than $1,000. Your ride in the cab to the emergency is going to cost you over $1,000. But so that emergency fund of $1,000, 49% of Americans, if $1,000 showed up, a bill, they wouldn't have the ability to pay that off without getting a loan or put it on a credit card. Okay? Again, that's just who we are as a country. What if it was also true that the average American, if God whispered into your heart, I want you to do something that might cost you $1,000, wouldn't be able to do it? It's the same deal. Why? Because we're making giving decisions based on our living habits. We're doing what we need, and then if there's anything left over, and here's what I'm telling you, across the global landscape, we have a desire to acquire, we have an assumption of consumption, and some of us right now are anticipating an end of year review to be able to pay for last month's finances, right? Because we need more because we raise our standard of living as time goes on. And so I want us to look at the other way to look at this. Generous people make living decisions based on a giving habit. And the difference is which one's a priority. Do I start with my living decision or do I start with my giving decision? And I'm not talking about how much you have. I'm talking about the posture of your heart. What would it look like if all of us who follow Jesus started, no matter what we have, by saying, God, what do you want me to do with what I have? How can I be generous with this? When I have that answer, then I determine how I'm gonna live. As opposed to, what do I want? What do I need? Oh, there's an emergency like flat tires, emergency like braces, emergency like Christmas. And then what do I have left over? I would if I could, but I can't, so I won't. And a lot of us know what it's like to feel like to know what it's like to wish you can do more, but you quite frankly just can't. And sometimes it's because that's just the way it is. And sometimes it's because that's the way we've allowed it. So I want to look at a story in Scripture. I want to look at some quick takeaways and some disciplines. Now, let me also preface it with this. The moral of the story today is not give more to North Point. That's not what I'm going after. If you've been coming to North Point any length of time, you know that we don't do like mini sermons right before the offering. We don't try and do a chicken soup for the teenage soul and tell you a story about what your offering's gonna do. We don't try and manipulate, motivate, that kind of thing. We don't even give you a percentage that you're supposed to give, right? A lot of churches, maybe you grew up doing that and you're like, am I supposed to give 10%? Yeah, that's my tithe. And some of you are like, you're like, what's a tithy? Okay, I don't know, right? We're not here to say, here's, that kind of thing. All we want to say is, let's be generous. Let's be generous towards the areas that we know God is working in. For me in my life, does that include the church? Absolutely. Do I have a giving plan? Absolutely. Does my giving include things outside the church? Absolutely. And I hope that's true for everybody. I think everybody who's part of this mission, I would hope that you believe in the mission. You're like, hey, I want to make sure that that's part of my mission. I also think that there's other great things that God's going to speak to you for you to be generous in. So that's not what this is. So I want us to shake that off. But what I want us to do is, how do we focus on the topic of money? Here's what Jesus says in Luke chapter 12. And it's interesting. It says, someone in the crowd said to Jesus, teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Time out. What kind of brother would do that? How many of you would be bummed? Like if your sibling took all your parents' money when they passed? I'd be like, bro, come on. Like that's like don't be that sibling. Do not be that sibling, okay? Somehow parents pass, there's an inheritance, and some brother's like hoarding all the money. So this dude's like, that's not fair. I totally agree with him. Now what's ironic is he comes to Jesus with it. Jesus is like, this ain't my circus, these ain't my clowns, okay? Why you trouble me? As a matter of fact, here's what he says. Jesus replied, man, Oop, I love that. Bro, like what? Who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? Like I ain't your lawyer. Like the guy comes to Jesus because his brother's an idiot. His brother's like, neener, mom and dad died and I got all the money. And this guy's like, Jesus, that ain't fair, tell him to share. He's like, bro, Cephas, listen. That's not my job. But then he said, watch out. Have you ever said to somebody, watch out? Like maybe it's a kid chasing a ball into the street. Maybe it's a parent who puts his kids, on their shoulders and walks into a room with a ceiling fan. Okay, you know what I'm saying? Like when you say watch out, it's usually exclamation point like right now. You don't see what I see and it's gonna hurt you. When Jesus says to us, watch out, he's saying, you don't see what I see. And that's true about greed. I've been a pastor over 25 years. And I've never had one person schedule an appointment with me and have to confess. I mean, I've had people do that, okay, for sure. But never about greed. Like, they're like, Pastor, I gotta bring this between you and the Lord. I'm just greedy. Because how many, raise your hand if you know someone greedier than you. Right? Just point to someone greedy. Like, we all know someone greedier than us. Because greed isn't something we see in the mirror. Like, greed's one of the deadly sins. Deadly sins. But it's also a sin you don't even know you're doing because you don't recognize it. All the other deadly sins, you kind of know what you're doing. Like adultery, you kind of know, like, I don't think you're my spouse. like, you know, like, what? But, murder, you kind of know what you're, but greed, like, you could be guilty of the deadly sin of greed and for real not even have a clue. Because you were just an 8-year-old and as a kid, you were playing a game. You grew up in a culture that was just like, it's about more. And Jesus says, watch out. And he says, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. And then he told him this parable. Once upon a time, tells a story. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. If you're into grammar, okay, it'd be kind of a fun activity to circle all the personal pronouns this guy says in the story. What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Side note, how many of you already feel bad for this poor guy? This farmer, he's got so much wealth. He's like, where am I going to put it? Like today, if you used one of our connection cards and you're like, I've got a prayer request. Every bank president has called me and says, no more, we can't take any more of your money. And I've already got 7 bank presidents who have denied me giving any more money because we can't ensure that. You've hit all of our limits. And your prayer request was like, I'm so stressed. I need to find an 8th bank that will take some of my money because everyone else has already capped out the limit. Like, we wouldn't hotline that. All staff, drop what you're doing. Get on your knees right now and pray for this poor person. That'd be like humble brag, right? It'd be like, oh yeah, we'll all pray for you, right? What a bad situation. Yeah, have you ever had someone humble brag, like in a prayer request, like, please pray for my kid. They got accepted to Princeton, and I don't know if we can afford it. Like, yeah, okay. Please pray for the Chiefs. They're playing so bad, but they're 11-1. Right? Like okay. So this guy's like, what am I going to do? His number one stress. Now, think about the time of human history and the location this story takes place. This is an agrarian society where they were poor and destitute. They didn't have a lot of money. So Jesus is talking to a bunch of poor people who depended on the Romans throwing them bread, whose Jesus' most famous miracles are multiplying bread. And they would be like, hey, can you do that bread trick again? People were poor. And Jesus is telling the story, once upon a time, there was a guy who was so loaded. He had so much produce. His barns and storage units were full. And I bet the people weren't pitying the guy. Here's what it says. He says, what am I going to do? Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And I will store my surplus grain, and I will say to myself, self, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Not only is this guy wealthy, not only is he incredibly socially aware, he's brilliant. He came up with an awesome, brilliant plan for his solution, for his problem. His problem is he has too much stuff, so let's start a storage unit business. And now he's got more protection for all of his more stuff. And then Jesus, in his best B.A. Barabbas, Mr. T voice, says, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves but isn't rich towards God. This is not a parable with a principle of it's a sin to have a lot. That's not the principle. This is a principle that it's a sin to be greedy. 3 things that will threaten all of us, okay? Money myths. The first is the myth of more needs. More. The myth of more needs. I need more. And I got to tell you, I think what Jesus would say to America is watch out. You live in a culture that says it's all about collecting as much as possible before you go back in the box. Don't do it. Watch out. What seems to be normal is you think you're winning because you have more than. Watch out. Some of you feel like you're losing because you have less than. It's not true. Life doesn't consist of the abundance of your possessions. So watch out. Don't follow the myth of more stuff. Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't have a list. I'm not saying you shouldn't have desires. Just recognize the difference between needs and greeds. And I could easily consider something a need, but it's actually a luxury. And maybe some of us are in this room, statistics would say a lot of us in this room, probably 50% of us in this room, are in a spot where there are so many needs, we can't make it. And even in that spot, I hope you see that God is more than enough. We've all gone through seasons like that. Some of us are living in a season like that. When we look at the God of Scripture, the prosperity gospel, if you're familiar with that, this idea that your wealth means God's blessing you, that's garbage, okay? It has nothing, it doesn't hold up in Scripture. Because the story of the God of the Bible is the God who delivered his people out of Egypt, and he brought them manna from heaven. And every day they were like, is God gonna provide for our needs today? He did it again. And the next day, he did it again. And then when Jesus taught his disciples to pray, he says, pray this, give us this day our, what kind of bread? Daily bread. Because that was the kind of people he was talking to. Like, am I gonna eat today? And some of us, we're stressed because we're like, God, will you give me my monthly bread? I just wanna make some bread. God, will you give me my annual bread? Will I be able to retire from my bread factory and then live for 30 more years on my bread? And we're stressed. And I want you to know, if you're living in a season of life where you're like, God, would you give me my daily bread? You're in good company. Because God's your provider. He's good. And for thousands of years, you join the majority of those who trusted God for daily provision. And I'm not saying that's where you need to always be. I'm just saying if you're there, please don't associate that with losing. Just don't miss the awareness of God's presence and his provision with the stress of finances. Jesus never seemed to be freaked out about money. His disciples were. They were like, well, how are we going to pay our tax bill? Jesus says, go fishing, then pull the coin out of the fish's mouth, right? That's why Captain Rick, he's my favorite fishing guy. Every time he catches a fish, he kisses that sucker on the mouth. I think he's sucking it in case there's coin inside of there, right? Jesus is like, yeah, I'm not stressed about what you're stressed. On the Sermon on the Mount, he says, consider the lilies of the field. Aren't they beautiful? Not even Solomon in all of his glory was arrayed like they are. Are you all worried? He says, look at all the birds of the air. You don't even worry about them. They don't worry about, and not one of them drops without God noticing. There was a woman with just 2 little pieces of coin, and she brought in one day. And God honored her because she wasn't stressed with what she had. Not because she gave all she had. That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is she recognized who her provider was, and she was content in all seasons. If you're in a season where you're stressed, I would say this. 1, recognize God's there and he's going to be providing for you. Second thing, though, recognize you also live in a pretty consumer-driven culture. And what can you do by looking at your list of living and say, cut that, cut that, cut that, cut that, cut that, cut that. Leanna and I lived in this season for a good chunk of early on in marriage. And we would be like, okay, we're never going out, okay? We're not going to games until halftime when you can sneak in. And when we go out, if we ever do go out, we never get a beverage, we never get an appetizer, we never get dessert, and we look at the right side of the menu before we look at the left side of the menu. And when we see something in our price range, we're like, okay, do we like that, okay? That's the season we're in. We're gonna make stuff for Christmas. You figure out, okay, what's gonna be. We're not gonna do cable. We're gonna do whatever. And you start living weird, because why? we had already made a giving decision, and we knew if we don't cut back our living decision, we're gonna have to eliminate our giving decision. And so we're like, let's learn to be content with nothing. And then if we have a lot, we're never gonna get so arrogant about it that we give up. Let's raise our standard of giving, not our standard of living. Second thing is the myth of I'm more important. The myth of more needs and the myth of I'm more important than other people. Like it's all about me. It's all about me, 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 me. Look at all the personal pronouns in this story. This guy was focused on him. What if you were blessed to be a blessing to others? What if what you think you own is really on loan from a good God who wants to use you to bless a broken world? What if you thought like that? Arrows out. Third thing is this myth of more time. I'm gonna be, because a lot of people say it this way. I'm gonna be generous one day. And now, I'm not thinking of anybody in mind right now. So if this is you, this is just an accident, okay? But a lot of people say these things. I'm gonna be more generous. And what I would say to you is, I doubt it. Like, why? When? When are you gonna be more generous? There's no magic time. There's no magic payroll. There's no magic amount. There's no magic. Money will just magnify what I already am. I could be generous and trusted with little, and then I could be generous and trusted with a lot. If I wait till I have a lot to be generous, what I'm determining is I'm letting my standard of living impact my decision of giving. So these are some things that trapped this guy in the story, and I think things that trap a lot of Americans. So here's 3 money muscles to build, to develop, to flex. The first is this muscle of contentment, right? And contentment in today's definition could just mean this: I don't need it. I don't need it. Like, do I need to go out today? No. Do I need the newest iPhone? No. Do I need the fastest car? No. Now, it's not guilty if you got it. That's great. But it's saying, I am not going to need everything. I'm going to cut back, and learn to be content in whatever season I'm in. Second thing is gratitude, is I didn't produce it. Every gift that I have comes from God the Father anyway. And so this isn't me. It's not my strategy. It's not my ability. It's the good Lord who gave me the ability to be in this position. And the third thing is this gift of generosity, right? That I won't hoard it. It's not all about me and mine. Now, if we look at this, and I'm this farmer, okay? And just because every time I can prove it, I still got it. Okay, so here we go. So we've got this. If I'm this farmer and God blesses me with all these apples, I can be like, mine. I'm going to eat apples. This is all day long. It's going to be great. Well, I better not. I'm allergic to apples, okay? This would be a bad thing for me. But even if I could, and I ate all, and I'm not allergic to apple fritter. Thank you for your prayers, okay? But the thing is, even if I could, I wouldn't eat all this because there's this principle of sowing that you would say, okay, inside every apple, you guys know this. If you've never seen this, okay, that's on you too. Okay, there's seeds. It's not wrong to eat an apple. It's foolish to never plant one. If you want to eat an apple for generations, make sure you're planting a few. If all we do is acquire, consume, nom, 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 me, more, my, no. We're not going to be able to be a blessing, not only for ourselves, but for others. So my question for you is, if you made a decision to plant an apple, but some of you are like, Jeremy, you don't understand. I only have 3 apples. I don't have 20 apples. Plant one of them. And here's what Leah and I made a decision to do early on. And this is what we're going to do. We'll do this in the next month. We do this at the beginning of every year. How much money will we give this year? We set a goal. This is what we want to give. And we don't take that into account with our budget. Ignore our budget, and we start by saying, how much do we want to give? We come up with a number, and then we say, how do we want to give it? And I believe in this mission. I give it to North Point, but I believe in other things as well. And we make a decision. We chart it. almost every day, because I'm weird like this, almost every day of the year, I review my goals. And that's one of my goals. And we have a conversation several times a month. Here's our giving goal. Here's where we're at with our giving goal. Here's how much extra we haven't yet given to. Where do you want to give towards this? We've got this amount of money this month that we want to give away that's different than what we've already done. And what we're able to do then is have conversations with God. And I know that sounds spiritual. It's just saying, what strikes our heart? What's something we believe in? When an opportunity comes up, we talk to each other. Hey, do we have money in this? Sometimes an opportunity comes up, we're like, no, we're already good. I've already paid that bill. Okay, we already taken care of our generosity. But then we're like, but can we? Could we do something? And we made a commitment, never fudge this. We're willing to fudge this. Living. But there's been seasons where we've had to change what this looks like. But whether I've got more than I need or I've got not as much as I want, what I want to do is be a person who's content, who's grateful, and who's generous. And I want to land it this way. If you're here, look at that last verse. Jesus said, so this will be the same case with whoever handles their wealth like this. And he says this, let me go back to the last line. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but they're not rich towards God. So my last question is, where is your wealth aimed? Are you rich towards God? And again, you can define that however God puts on your heart. How do you want to be generous? Who do you want to be generous towards? What would it look like if you had that convo early? Last night, after the service, we had an individual come up who's a single parent, going through a lot of tough times, financially overwhelmed in different season right now, and came up and they said, with tears in their eyes, said, I'm so thankful for this message, and I'm so thankful I'm part of a community that's helped me when I've been way over my skis, right? In the community of people who include some who are so generous, they were obedient to God's Spirit, just saying, do this. And this person said, I was the recipient of some of those gifts from someone who had extra and wanted to be generous. And as this person is crying, they said, and I can't wait to be the person who does that for somebody else. And I'm like, that's beautiful. It's not about how much we have. It's not about how much we acquire. And it ain't about selling our kids. It's about at the end of the day, before this all goes in the box, it's not he who had the most cash wins. It's he who is the best manager, the most present, the most grateful, who is generous with what they had, who didn't play the game that most Americans are playing, that are stressed about finances. Not that it's not going to be a big issue, but that you said, God, I'm not going to let that stress drown out my gratitude. So I want to pray for you. I want to pray with you. If you're in a spot today and you are overwhelmed financially, I get it. And I want to pray that this week God shows you that he's your provider and that you wouldn't wait until you're in a different season to figure out what generosity looks like for you. And if you're at a spot where you could probably use some more barns because you got so much coming in, I pray that you wouldn't feel guilty or weird about that, but that you would say, God, how can I aim my resources in a way that honors you and solves problems in our community? So Father, today, I pray you would allow us to sense your presence, that you are our provider, that you're with us. For those who need daily bread, I pray it would show up tomorrow morning. It would be warm and smell like heaven. God, I pray that you would provide that daily bread and that daily provision, and people would know in that season of need, you are their provider. I pray for those who are in a spot where they've got extra, that, Lord, you would speak to them about how to point that. And for those who are fed up, you would allow them to be freed up so that they would be generous, content, and grateful followers of you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.